Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk to you about what can arguably be considered one of Africa's most endangered small mammals. And I'm going to just give a brief overview of the broader taxonomic work we're doing. It's a multifaceted approach to try and unravel the evolutionary relationships from subfamily level right down to intraspecific level, because there's a lot of uncertainty. But the species I'm going to focus on is the Juliana's golden mole mostly. So golden moles belong to one of the most ancient Afrotheria clades of placental mammals, which comprise 6 orders: elephants, hyrax, elephant shrews, dugongs, and then the Afrosauricidae, which is tenrecs, and golden moles, which tenrecs is endemic to Madagascar. So these enigmatic animals are extremely elusive, and very often you find landowners that honestly tell you that they didn't know that they existed on their property because they hardly ever come above ground unless threatened. So they do come when really needed. But other than that, they are extremely obscure. They're insectivorous. They have extremely narrow habitat tolerances, very high habitat specificity, a very specific soil type. Must be soft, burrowable soil because they're only 32 to 45 grams on average. So they don't have the ability to burrow through heavy soils. And for that reason, they are actually very threatened. And that counts for 10 golden mole species that's on the IUCN Red List. And 18 of the golden mole species are distributed in southern Africa, and 3 are from isolated populations from the rest of Africa. They cover a wide spectrum of vegetation types, altitudes, as you can see from the slide, anything from the beach to deserts, to grassland, to fynbos, and the mountains, mountain forests in the Eastern Cape, where the giant golden moles occur. So they have a naturally fragmented range because of the habitat specificity, but this is also exacerbated by anthropogenic effects. And they're mostly threatened by agriculture, urbanization, and then infrastructure development. And the photographs, I will have more of those, but this would have been a mining site, which wasn't approved. This is a quartzite mine. This is agriculture in the vicinity of Morimole, and also roads and just housing development. So what we tried to do was initially to resolve the taxonomy and phylogeography of golden moles as a group, to identify cryptic lineages that may exist, which would be in need of conservation attention, and then to ensure that our findings is then communicated to conservation authorities that would then take the protection further. So we set out, collected golden moles from all over the distribution of the species, and so we had topotypical material from all but 2 species, and we did a mitochondrial nuclear DNA phylogeny coupled with morphological characters. And the main thing I'm going to highlight here is that the evolutionary relationships we found based on genetic studies was very contrasting to the traditional classification now in place based on morphology and cytogenetics. And just to give you a few examples, so this is a Bayesian tree which is fully resolved. It's the first fully resolved phylogeny for golden moles, and it contains a number of interesting findings. For example, the Namib golden mole, which is considered to have had 2 subspecies, actually now is elevated to 2 good species and one of the older species, where morphologically they're very conserved. Then we found very close relationships between golden moles that occur in the Western Cape, and they are the Cape golden mole and Cryptochloris that occur along the northern parts of the Northern Cape. And we found several distinct lineages in the green, which is evolutionary significant units, which should be maybe elevated to species level. And one of my, I co-supervised a student who's going to talk on that, where she actually diagnosed so many distinct and divergent evolutionary lineages that would be in need of protection. And that is indicated in the green. I think this thing's battery's going. Yeah, because I tried to point and then it doesn't. I can't see where the pointer is. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yes, I just want to go back to the tree. So actually, though, in the Western Cape, that's something I couldn't point out properly, that's the Cape golden mole and the moles from the Northern Cape. But they genetically so similar that they're going to be synonymized into the same genus. So our study showed that the new classification has 4 subfamilies, 8 genera and 24 species, and there was an overestimation of genera and an underestimation of species. We identified several cryptic lineages within Amblyosoma hottentotus, Eremotalpa, and then also within the focal species of the rest of the talk, Amblyosoma juliana. So this is one of Africa's and South Africa's most threatened species. In 1997, it was given the highest regional priority score of any mammal based on the area of occupancy, the genetic uniqueness, and level of endemism. And it's known from 3 isolated populations, the Kruger National Park, Nailsvlei, and Pretoria. And there are some morphological distinctive characters between them, but its coloration and the dentition is quite variable. But what we found is, in fact, when we did a mitochondrial DNA study based on 2 genes, that all of the 3 populations are monophyletic groups. They're genetically unique. The Pretoria and Modimolle populations are quite similar, but yet approximately 1 million years of divergence between them. And then the Kruger National Park population, as you can see, clearly highly divergent from the other 2, and possibly a cryptic species, but we only have DNA from 3 samples at this stage, so further genomic-wide markers will be needed. And the sister group, Gunningi, interestingly, also has quite a large divergence. And the next slide, I'm just going to point one thing out. It's a haplotype network. It's of the control region, which indicates the Modimolle population, the Pretoria population. But what I want to focus on is to just show you the number there is the number of mutational steps between Modimolle and the Pretoria population. And then you can see that the number of mutational steps between the Bromberg and Kruger Park 38 is almost as large as between Juliana and its sister group, the Gunnings golden mole from Tanin. So that is, we can say that each of them are evolutionary significant units, and that the Kruger population is almost like, if we had more samples, it would have definitely been raised to species status. And therefore, the other two populations may be the only surviving populations. Habitat modeling with 32 ecological variables showed the areas in light grey as potential habitat, because people couldn't believe this distribution, and the black areas, as you can see, the grayscale indicates the likelihood of its occurrence. But ground truthing in all those areas actually showed that they were found in the areas where they actually predicted, which is Pretoria and Modimolle and Kruger Park, and only the blue was localities that was found in the vicinity of the Modimolle populations based on the habitat model, but none of the other areas contain any golden moles. Therefore, we know that this is where, as far as we know to date. And they are partially protected in Elsro Nature Reserve. They're obviously protected in the Pretoria's Kop area of the National Park, but they're extremely range restricted in those areas. And there's still threat, a lot of threat, as you can see, from agriculture in Modimolle and infrastructure development. And then a road such as that would be a significant barrier for a golden mole. And then it brings me to the Brandberg Reach in eastern Pretoria, which you can see is surrounded by urban development. And this photo, the aerial photos from Craig Jackson's thesis, was taken in 2007. I can promise you it looks very similar this side. It's really under severe threat from urbanization and quartzite mining. So at the moment, the known distribution range is 21 by 1.8 kilometers, and the actual area of occupancy is less than 10 square kilometers. Yet, we realize that some development somehow gets approved. And some are on small properties, which isn't under legislation and can't, it goes under the radar, if I could put it like that. And then also there's huge infrastructure developments. And this is where it comes in that people have absolute rights to transport, to water, to everything. But in the case of the Brandberg, which is not only home to the Juliana's golden mole, but also to 19 other threatened species, my question is always how does it happen that these things really have to go through that 21 kilometers? And I'm just showing you examples because it's causing habitat fragmentation, small isolated populations with that can cause obviously demographic effects and inbreeding and low population viability and reproductive success, isolation, movement of animals are curtailed, and total habitat destruction. If you look at that, and this is sort of the area, this is the berm that's there, and that's just behind that. And this was a photo. This survey was done in 2001 by Nigel Bennett and Gary Bronner, and this survey was done by myself between this periods, and it almost looks like a photocopy. They can't go anywhere. They use primary and secondary dispersal corridors of suitable soil. And then there's also major infrastructure development like water pipelines and things. Those red dots indicate tunnels, not number of moles, that occur in an area. And at the moment, there's an application for a water pipeline to go through this area, which is part of only 7 kilometers of Habitat Fragment 3. I wanted to actually just point something out. Sorry. This habitat is in 4 distinct fragments. This is a housing development and 2 major roads. So it's already fragmented into 4 sections. Sorry. this is a picture of a reservoir that was built in 2001. The red dots indicate the same red dots that are here, but this survey was done in 2015. So what this shows us is the effect of habitat fragmentation on these animals. Because 15 years later, when I mapped the current places where golden moles occur, it was only in the areas that wasn't affected. And that also indicates that rehabilitation is extremely important, because they do occur in areas where water pipes have been laid and the topsoil has been put back in an appropriate manner, and they come back and they use it. So whether the soil is natural or disturbed, they do come back. But this, to me, is the most profound example of what habitat fragmentation can do. And then also the case where some specialist assessments are done, and then someone would recommend that like a garden or something would be erected for the moles to go in. But it's not connected to the ridge. So my plea is actually that if you think about this critically endangered subpopulation of an endangered species with 3 populations, which is probably only 2, and because it's not a subspecies, it's not protected, it will no longer be protected under TOPS in the future. But yet, due to the conflict between humans and animals, some huge developments do get approved. So in the face of this dire threat, GDOT realized the need for a biodiversity management plan, which we currently working on in collaboration with them. And I'm not going to go into detail, only to say there's 3 working groups and there's stakeholders involved, and we also invited conservation, environmental managers, researchers, landowners to participate. And the one is research, and that's every aspect of golden moles that we don't know, and it is a lot, and reassessment of the threats that are facing them. That's basically, we're doing ecological research, trying to test successful ways of reconnecting the moles by maybe using pipes filled with sand across barriers, things like that. The second group would look at, got my numbers mixed up. They look at the protected status, best practice for EIAs, and they engage with landowners to try and get access to the properties for the survey so that we know where the moles are, because that's one of the biggest problems. The whole place is an environment in private, mostly private land. So South Africa has of the best biodiversity legislation, and as we all know, the NEMA and NEMA Act, the threatened and terrestrial ecosystems, vegetation types. The Bronberg is a critical biodiversity area. A no-go policy should apply. Then there's regional policies and guidelines, including, for example, the Gauteng Sea Plan, where it's also a no-go zone for development, critical biodiversity. The REACH policy, which is for the protection of quartzite reaches. Yet, there's a diverse array of specialists assessing these, and these are not always golden mole specialists. It's small mammal specialists, because that is what the legislation actually says. And my plea is just that to be unashamedly ethical when one actually approaches these very threatened animals. So with my talk, I tried to show the importance of a sound taxonomy for conservation planning and to inform management of the habitat, especially in this case, habitat protection is crucial. And then also obviously using the example of Juliana's golden mole. And then one of the challenges that we face is that we need to somehow try to improve the conservation efforts to protect the geographically isolated populations. We must do further research to delineate further uncertain taxonomic and geographic boundaries of species, and some of the species may need to be reassessed. So what we're actually stuck with is a very rare species, and it's not a rhino and it's not an elephant, which is equally important, but the small species are often overlooked, and I think we can learn a lot from what they can teach us if we care enough to keep them. I just want to thank the following funding bodies and people that collected tissue and people that provided their maps, etc. And these are my collaborators that have been working. We're a whole team working together on this fascinating animal. Thank you.